Let's get started. Blend modes determine how the pixels of two layers will interact with each other to produce a resultant visual effect. To use blend modes, you need at least 2 layers. Of course, you can have more than 2, but since we are starting today, we'll stick with 2. Of these 2 layers, the layer which is on the top is called the blend layer. The blend mode is applied on the blend layer. And on this blend layer, we have this yellow circle. The bottom layer is called the base layer. And for the base layer, we have this color gradient. I'll turn on the blend layer. Then I'll show you that the blend mode has no effect if applied on the base layer or the bottom layer. For that, I'll select the base layer. And from the blend mode tab, apply any random blend mode. I'll select subtract. So there is no change when the blend mode is applied on the base layer. And I'll undo this so that the base layer goes back to normal. Now we will select the blend layer and apply the same blend mode to see if there is any change. So now it's established that the blend mode takes effect if applied on the blend layer or the top layer. All the blend modes inside Photoshop are grouped based on what they do. The first group is the normal group, and the first blend mode of the normal group is normal. In this example, for the base we have the yellow solid, and for the blend we have 3 strips of blue in different opacities. So this strip has an opacity of 100%, so it's totally opaque blue. This strip has an opacity of 50%, so it's semi-transparent and you can see the checkered boxes through it. And since the third strip has merely an opacity of 10%, you can hardly see any color. Next, I'm going to turn on the base and click on the blend layer. You can see that normal is already the default blend mode, which is true for all layers. Still, I'll click on it to show you that the normal blend mode is indeed inside the normal group that I had shown you earlier. So I'm going to click and select normal. And this is what it is. When the pixel of the blend layer is totally opaque, it doesn't allow any pixel from the base layer to be seen at all. And that is why you cannot see any yellow pixels through this blue strip. With 50% opacity on the blend layer, you can see some yellow pixels through this strip. And with 10% on the blend layer, you can see a lot more yellow pixels of the base layer through the blend layer. The max you can do is adjust the transparency of the blend layer further by controlling the opacity slider in the layers panel. As you go on decreasing the opacity of the blend layer, more and more yellow pixels of the base layer shows through it. Like most of the blend modes except a few, the fill for normal blend mode acts exactly the same as opacity. The next blend mode in the normal group is dissolve. For dissolve too, we have the same example as normal mode. I'm going to click on the blend layer and then select dissolve. Now what dissolve does is that it randomly turns off pixels of the blend layer based on its opacity. Since this strip was totally opaque with an opacity of 100%, dissolve blend mode didn't turn off any of its pixels. The middle strip was semi-transparent with an opacity of 50%, which is why the dissolve blend mode turned off some of its pixels, and that is the reason you can see some of the yellow pixels of the base layer through the blend layer. As the opacity dips further in the third strip, the dissolve blend mode takes away even more pixels from the blend layer, which is why you can see more and more yellow pixels from the base layer. Another important thing I want to draw attention to is the fact that after the application of the dissolve blend mode, all the pixels of the blend layer has turned opaque. Let me zoom in so that I can show you what I mean. On this side, we had the blue pixels at an opacity of 50%. But the scattered blue pixels are now all opaque. Similarly, on this side, the blue pixels had an opacity of 10%, but they are now all opaque as well. The next blend group is the darken group. And as the name suggests, every blend mode in this group creates a darkening effect. Think of this group as the kingdom of the Dark Lord. In this kingdom, everything black remains and everything white perishes. So let's take an example. For the blend layer, we have these social media icons, and the icons are in black with a white base. And for the base layer, we have this pink solid. Let's select the blend layer and try using the blend modes from the darken group. So based on what I've told you earlier, if I use any of the blend modes from here, the black should remain and the white should disappear. So let's test it. If I mouse over on Darken, the white indeed disappears and black remains. Since white gets deleted, we can see the base pink layer in its place. Let's check the next blend mode and see if the theory holds here as well. So the multiply blend mode also complies with it. Let's see color burn, the next one linear burn, and darker color. So all the blend modes inside the Darken blend group hold the statement true that black remains and white perishes, although there is an exception. To know what it is, we have the same example. I'll turn off the blend layer for a sec. Then let's double click on the thumbnail of the solid base. At this point, the color is not extreme bright yet. So let's just do that. I'll turn on the blend layer, select the blend layer, and try the previous blend modes again. Let's start with Darken, holds true, multiply, still same, color burn. Here's the exception. So for any extreme base color, color burn can transform even black. Let's finish the process and show you that linear burn and darker color have no change in effect. Let's take another color, green for example. I'm gonna turn on the blend layer, select it, and let's try color burn again. It's alright as of now, deleting the whites and securing the blacks. Let's double click on the solid green thumbnail. And let's see what happens if I take this green to its extreme. So what did we learn? For certain extreme colors, color burn can delete black as well. Let's try flipping the layers so that we have the black and white icons on the base layer and the solid color on the blend layer. Let's see what happens now if we apply the blend modes from the Darken group in this example. Let's try Darken. So even when the black and white are on the base layer, Darken chooses to delete the white and reveal the black. So no matter what, black always dominates. Let's try the next one, multiply. Same result, black dominates and white perishes. But watch what happens when I hover over color burn. Color burn seems to be a little bit empathetic towards white here. It says, okay, even if I let you die when you're on the blend layer, I'll let you live if you're on the base layer. So this is another exception where white is allowed to live in the kingdom of the Dark Lord. And color burn is the culprit here that breaks the rule of the Dark Lord. Color burn is even more audacious. We'll see that in the next example. Here, for the base, we have white, and for the blend, we have black. Let's run through the blend modes and see what happens. First is Darken. So the law of the Dark Lord is upheld, white perishes, black remains. Let's go on to the next one. Same result. Let's skip color burn for now and try linear burn. The same outcome. And the last blend mode also gives us the same result, which is victory of black over white. Now let's address the elephant in the room, color burn. It makes the Dark Lord die and the White Lord live. Bear in mind that this is only true when white is on the base layer and black is on the blend layer. Now let's start learning the blend modes individually. For that, we have this example. For the top blend layer, we have this red circle. And on the bottom, we have this blue circle. Just looking at these two circles, which of the two do you think is brighter? For me, red looks brighter. So let's go ahead and test if my eyesight is correct. I'm going to double click on the thumbnail of the red shape layer. Here you can see that the red circle has a brightness of 100%. Let's check the brightness of the blue circle. Seems like I have a failing eyesight because the brightness of blue is 100 as well. But let's check with the blend modes to see if my eyesight is really that weak. I'm gonna click on darker color. But according to Photoshop, since both the circles have the same amount of brightness, neither of the two circles is brighter or darker than the other. So if I click on darker color, Photoshop should favor neither the red circle nor the blue circle. So keep an eye on this overlapping area. So my eyesight was correct. This red circle is indeed brighter than the blue circle. Or in other words, this blue is darker than the red. And that is the reason when we chose darker color, this overlapping region is showing blue instead of red. But what is the reason? Because last time we checked, both of them had the same brightness. The reason is darker color doesn't rely on brightness, it relies on another metric. Let's double click on the thumbnail of the red shape layer and have a look over here. L means luminosity or lightness. Unlike brightness, luminosity makes an accurate reading of how our eyes perceive color. I'll make a whole tutorial on luminosity and brightness later. But for now, you can see that the luminosity of red is 54. Let's check the luminosity for the blue circle. The blue circle has a much lower luminosity. It has a luminosity of 30, and that is why it is the darker of the two. Let's take an example for this. On the base layer, we have an illustration of this character on a white background. And on the blend layer, we have this blue solid. Let's see what happens when we use the darker blend mode. So the hair, eyes, beard, and the shoes are darker than the blend layer. And in all the other areas, the blend layer is darker than the base layer. Next, I'm going to go for a relative study of the individual blend modes inside the Darken group. And for that, I've arranged this example. We have the blue circle on the base layer and the pink circle on the blend layer. I'm going to run through the blend modes one by one. The way I look at it is, I think of these three as a team, where Darken produces the least darkness, Multiply darkens a little more, and Linear burn the most. And Color burn is of a different league altogether. When the base layer and the blend layer have a decent amount of luminosity, Color burn darkens on the basis of the base layer. And in addition to that, it adds a punch of color to that darkness. So since the base layer over here is blue, I'm expecting after I apply the Color burn blend mode, the intersection over here is gonna be a colorful dark blue. Let's check that. So it's true. And as you might have noticed earlier, Color burn produces different results based on the order of the layers. So let's flip the layers. Since the pink circle is the base layer now, if I apply the Color burn blend mode, what do you think will be the resultant effect? I'm guessing a colorful dark pink. Let's find out. And I was correct. I'm going to run the blend modes of the Darken group on this example. We have an image of a lady on the base layer. And for the blend layer, we have this pink solid. Let's apply the blend modes one by one. First, I'm going to go to darker color. So over here, the blend layer is darker than the base layer. And over here, the base layer is darker than the blend layer. Then let's go to Darken, which creates the least darkening effect of the three. Next, I'm going to move on to Multiply, which is going to darken a little more. And Linear burn the most of the three. Let's see what Color burn does. Unlike all the other blend modes in the Darken group, Color burn has let the white pixels of the base layer in this region to remain. At this point, it might not be visually apparent that the Color burn blend mode takes into account the colors of the base layer while darkening, because the result is totally pinkish, which is favoring the blend layer. But trust me, this pink is nothing. It's still favoring the colors of the base layer. I can easily prove it if I flip the layers. I'll select the image layer and then apply Color burn. So you can see that the pink or the red is way more blown than before. This is how it looks when Color burn actually favors the base pink color. I'm going to move the layers back. Color burn is also one of the 8 special blend modes in Photoshop. Meaning, for Color burn, fill and opacity work differently. First, let's see what opacity does. So I'm going to select the blend layer and then pull the opacity slider. So it's just gradually fading out the blend layer, nothing more than that. Let's try fill. You can see that instead of just fading, darkness is gradually receding from the brighter areas as I decrease fill. Linear burn is also one of the 8 special blend modes, but it doesn't always show the difference between fill and opacity unless we use it on black and white. So here we have the image, and on the blend layer we have this black and white gradient. Let's apply linear burn. See what opacity does? Just fading things as usual. Let's try fill. So as I'm reducing fill, darkness is gradually receding from the brighter areas. The next blend group is the Lighten group. Think of this group as the kingdom of the White Lord. So this group is the exact opposite of the previous group that we just discussed, which is the Darken group. Lighten is the opposite of darken, screen is the opposite of multiply, color dodge is the opposite of color burn, linear dodge the opposite of linear burn, and lighter color the opposite of darker color. So in the Lighten group, or in the kingdom of the White Lord, everything white remains and everything black perishes. To demonstrate that, we have this pink solid on the base layer, and on the blend we have these icons. And this time all the logos are black up against a white background. Let's go ahead and run the blend modes to see if my theory is correct. The first blend mode of the Lighten group is Lighten. Lighten makes the black logos disappear, which is why you can see the pink base through it, and as I've said earlier, white remains. I'm gonna go with the next one, Screen. We get the same effect, black gets deleted and no touching white. Move on to the next one, then Linear Dodge and lighter color. But just like with the Darken group, we also have an exception with the Lighten group. And to study that, we have this example where the layers are flipped. So white and black logos on the bottom base layer and the pink solid on the blend layer. We're going to try the blend modes a second time and see what difference they make this time. First up we have Lighten, which pretty much seems to abide by the rules of the White Lord. So white is there for you to see and the black logos disappear. Let's continue with Screen. Similar outcome. I'm going to skip color dodge for now. As you might have guessed, this is the opposite of color burn, which is where the twist lies. So moving on to Linear Dodge, which gives the same effect, and lighter color, the same result, which leaves us with the last blend mode, Color Dodge. As soon as I hovered over Color Dodge, the black logos came back, which is against the law of the kingdom of the White Lord. So Color Dodge is like if black chooses to stay on the base layer, it lets it live. Let's take another extreme example of Color Dodge where it lets black to supersede even white. Of course, black has to be on the base layer and white on the blend. Then I'll repeat the process of checking the individual blend modes. Lighten shows white, Screen also white. Let's skip Color Dodge for now. Linear Dodge shows white and lighter color white as well. But when I take my cursor to Color Dodge, black is upheld. Let's now take a look at our old example to have a general feel of how the Lighten group looks and how to remember it. We have the same image of this woman on the base layer, and for the blend we have this pink solid. Then we do our routine run through the blend modes one by one. I'll begin with lighter color, which shows that the blend layer is lighter than the base layer over here, and the base layer is lighter than the blend layer over here. Next, as with the Darken group, in the Lighten group as well, I think of these three as a team, in which Lighten produces the least brightness, followed by Screen, it produces a bit more, and Linear Dodge the most among the three. Now with Color Dodge, there is a saturation of color along with brightness. And Color Dodge, just like Color Burn, creates a different effect when the layers are flipped. Also, just like Color Burn, Color Dodge also favors the colors of the base layer while creating brightness. But you can say that the effect is already pink and it's probably favoring the blend layer. But wait till I flip the layers. Let's apply Color Dodge on the top image. And you can easily distinguish how deeper and bolder the pink is than the previous one. This is because Color Dodge is actually favoring the pink color of the base layer. For Color Dodge, usually you want your image to be on the base to get a better result. Now Color Dodge is one of the 8 special blend modes where fill operates quite differently than opacity. So let's select the blend layer and show you what opacity can actually do. It just creates an overall fading effect by adjusting the transparency of the blend layer. Now let's try out fill. With fill, each time it gradually decreases the brightness from the darker areas. Linear Dodge is also one of the 8 special blend modes, so let's try that. The effect is much softer than what we saw on Color Dodge. This brings us to the next set of blend modes, the contrast group. And as the name suggests, it creates contrast. Now in the contrast group, absolute gray is not tolerated. We have green solid for the base, and for the blend we have a group of gray logos. Then I'm going to perform the same drill. Overlay hides the gray logos, soft light hides them, hard light hides them, so does vivid light, linear light, and pin light. But when we get into hard mix, we have an exception. Although it deletes the gray colors, it creates a different hue. If we keep varying the base color, it will produce different effects each time. It can even delete the gray for some colors. This red, for example, makes the gray of the blend layer non-existent and lets hard mix behave like the rest of its group. We will take an example now. We have the image on the base and the pink solid on the blend. Next we'll do the usual run through. I think of these two as a team, where soft light creates a soft faded contrast and overlay creates a harsher contrast. The second team is made up of these three guys over here, but they will produce some decent result only if you flip the layers and use the opposite of what these two are using. So now with the same layer order as these two, if I hover my mouse over pin light, it doesn't produce that of a desirable effect. Same with linear light and hard light. But if I flip the layers and then try the blend modes, let's see what happens. Pin light produces the least contrast of the three, hard light a bit more than pin light, and linear light the most. Linear light is also one of the 8 special blend modes. To see the effect, we have to place the image on the base layer. First, let's apply linear light on the solid layer. We are going to try the opacity first. And as expected, it's just fading out the blend layer. Let's try the fill slider. It's gradually and dynamically creating a contrast on the image as I pull the slider down. Next we'll have a look at vivid light. For that I'll have to turn on the blend layer, select it, and then apply vivid light. Vivid light creates different effect when the layers are flipped, so let's try that as well. If you don't see it, I'll just put them side by side. Vivid light is also one of the 8 special blend modes, but for that I'll have to have the image on the base layer. So this is our opacity, just fading the blend layer. And as with fill, you can see the difference with your own eyes. Lastly, we are left with hard mix in the contrast group. We have a color wheel on the base layer with lots of colors. But if I am to apply hard mix on this, the color palette is going to reduce to CMYK, RGB and white. Let's see what it means. I'll turn on the blend layer, which is a green solid, and then apply the hard mix blend mode on it. So the resultant effect is showing no other color outside this group. What is this group comprised of? We have the basic colors from CMYK, that's cyan, magenta, yellow and black. Along with that, we have the colors of RGB, which are red, green and blue. And last but not the least, white. You will find no colors in this effect outside of them. Of course, the effect over here will change if I use a different color on the blend layer, but the resultant effect will never have any colors outside of this set. Hard mix is also one of the 8 special blend modes. So if I pull the fill slider down, it's going to show us more and more colors outside of this basic set of colors. And if I increase the fill, it's going to show us less and less of colors. Let's review hard mix on this example. So on the base layer, we have this nice image, and on the blend, we have this brown solid. Let's go ahead and use hard mix. You can see that all the colors used over here are taken from this palette. The image consists of green, yellow, red, black and white. Next up, we have the comparative blend group, and it's mostly made up of utility-based blend modes. But first I'll talk a little bit about opposite colors. Cyan is the opposite of red, magenta is the opposite of green, and yellow is the opposite of blue. Keep this bit of information in the back of your mind. To follow on, we have the same example. Let's turn on the blend layer and keep applying the blend modes one by one. I'm expecting to see an opposite of this color in the final result. And if you remember, what is the opposite of magenta? Green, right? So let's see. But applying difference creates green on some parts of the image, while rest of the image is still magenta. Why is that? Difference creates accurate opposite colors when the base is more towards the whiter end. So since this was totally white on the base over here, we get an exact opposite of magenta, which is green over here. But why these portions didn't change at all? Why are these still magenta? Because difference blend mode doesn't produce the opposite color when the base is on the blacker end. And what's more, it won't change the color at all and will let it stay as it is. Let's review that. On the base layer, these areas were totally black. So on areas of black, the colors should remain intact. There should be no change, which is exactly what's happening over here. Magenta is totally intact. Think of difference and exclusion as a team. If I hover over exclusion, you can see that it's just a softer version of difference. Subtract creates the opposite color where the base region is whiter. But unlike difference and exclusion, it makes the blend color totally disappear in the darker regions. Divide makes everything white wherever the base is white or drawing towards white. So these areas are totally white. And it produces the opposite color wherever the base is growing darker. So these areas have green. Difference is also one of the 8 special blend modes. To explain that, we have this example. On the base, we have this black and white gradient, and for blend, we have this red solid. Let's apply the difference blend mode on this. Since the opposite of red is cyan, on the white region, we have cyan, and on the dark region, we have red, no change of color. Now if I use my opacity slider, let's see what happens. It's just decreasing the intensity of difference. But watch carefully what happens when I use fill. Little by little, the red color is diminishing and its place is occupied by cyan. Let's take a practical example for this. The difference blend mode is already applied here. Let's use opacity, which is just fading the intensity of difference. But with fill, the magenta is gradually receding from the black areas and its place is occupied by green. Let's look at some of the utility-based examples. For that, we have 2 identical circles of the exact same color, and the circles are of course overlapping each other. This sky blue is made up of an R of 8, G of 169 and B of 188. Let's apply difference blend mode and see what happens in this overlapping area. What it's basically doing is that it's subtracting the individual channels of these 2 layers. The channels are exactly the same because these 2 balls have the exact same color. Let's subtract the channels and see what we get. 8 minus 8 is 0, 169 minus 169 is 0, and 188 minus 188 is also 0. So what's the color with R0, G0 and B0? Black, right? And that's what we got over here. So simply put, if we apply the difference blend mode on identical layers, we have black. But what's the use of it? Let's find out. This is a really simplistic example, but I hope you get the idea. We'll put the difference blend mode to use for alignment. For that, we have this vertical strip on the blend layer and this horizontal strip on the base layer. If you've noticed by now, this rectangle and this rectangle have the exact same color. And for some reason, I need to align them on top of one another. It's going to be really painful if I try to align them manually without any guides. So let's bring in our guide, which is difference. So the black is the area where the 2 rectangles are overlapping. Now it's really easy, I'll just have to make sure that the entire rectangle is black. And I've also taken help of the arrow keys on my keyboard to do that. Now let's take a look at one of the uses of the divide blend mode. We have an image of a girl on the base layer. You can easily notice that there is an awful green cast on this image, and the whole purpose of this example is to get rid of that. On the blend layer, we have this black solid. The color is not important at this point. For now, I want you to pay attention on this image and tell me which areas according to you should have been absolutely white and is currently having a green cast. For me, these are the regions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on the thumbnail and then sample the green cast from one of these areas. So the blend layer is now made up of the color of the green cast. Let's see what happens if I apply the divide blend mode. The color cast is gone from the image. The divide blend mode is actually dividing the two same colors in the two layers. Basically, it divides the individual channels, but I'm just explaining in an easy way. Anything divided by itself is what? 1, right? So the green of the blend layer divided by the green of the base layer is also 1. And in Photoshop, what is the color that is represented by 1? White, which is exactly what we have got on these areas. The next blend group is the composite group. We have this example, a colorful image for the base and a violet solid for the blend. Let's apply the blend modes one by one. Hue uses tint of the blend layer and saturation and brightness of the base layer. So in the resultant image, we got the violet tint information from the blend layer and the brightness and saturation information from the base image. Or in other words, the hue blend mode only affects the hue of the base layer. Let's see what happens when the same image is in black and white. Let me turn on the blend layer, select the layer and then try hue again. What's happening here? Why aren't we seeing the violet tint that we saw earlier? That is because there is basically no hue on the base image that can be targeted by the violet hue of the blend layer. So the base image remains totally untouched. The next blend mode in this group is saturation. The saturation blend mode targets the saturation of the base layer, leaving its hue and brightness totally untouched. And what controls the saturation of the base layer? It's controlled by both saturation and brightness of the blend layer. So let's check that. Let's double click on the thumbnail. And as I reduce the saturation of the blend layer, the resultant saturation is also decreasing. Let's try the brightness slider. As I reduce the brightness of the blend layer, it reduces the saturation over here as well. Next we have color blend mode. The color blend mode targets both the hue and saturation of the base layer. So it's just using the brightness of the base layer and hue and saturation from the blend layer. And like before, the saturation of the base layer is controlled by the saturation and brightness of the blend layer, and the hue is of course controlled by the hue of the blend layer. Let's find out what happens if I use the color blend mode on this black and white image. It colorizes the black and white image. So although the base layer didn't have any hue, the blend layer forcibly imposed its hue and saturation on the base layer, which is not the case with the hue blend mode. Last we have the luminosity blend mode, and for that we have this image on the base layer and a curves adjustment on the blend layer. I'm going to double click over here and reduce the brightness of the image. I only wanted to reduce the brightness of this image, but it looks like it has also affected its saturation and hue. The clothes were yellow, but now they have turned orangish. Herein comes the use of the luminosity blend mode. So with the luminosity blend mode, only the brightness of the base layer is affected, leaving its hue and saturation totally untouched. We've now come to the last blend mode. It's called pass-through. You can only access this blend mode if there is a group in the layers stack. So let's find out what it's all about. We have this image on the base, and on top we have this group. Let's find out what's inside this group. I'm gonna turn it on and then expand it. So inside this group we have this horizontal blue bar, and on top of that we have this vibrance adjustment layer. So I'm gonna double click on it and then reduce the vibrance. Since these two are inside the group, vibrance has only affected the blue bar. It doesn't pass through the group and affect the image outside the group, which brings us to the pass-through blend mode. Let me select the group first. You can see that right now its blend mode is normal. Now if I click on the drop down, you will see the new pass-through blend mode. You can see this option because I've selected a group and not a layer. Anyway, if I choose the pass-through blend mode, you should expect to see the vibrance adjustment affecting this image. So this adjustment has literally passed through this group and affected this image. And this is all I have for today. Make sure to check the other videos. I'll see you next time. Bye.